Hello?
Hello.
Okay, so it turns out that I was muted there right at the start. So we go again on that one. Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 1 of the Titanforge podcast. Professional streamer, by the way. My name is Dratnos, and joining me are my co-hosts, Trell and Tettles. Trell, why don't you say hi?
Hey guys, how's it going?
And Tettles.
Hello again, all.
Okay, take two. Second time is the charm on this sort of thing. So we're here. We're the Titanforge podcast. Let's go around. I guess since this is episode 1, we'll just kind of talk about who we are, and then we'll talk about what the show's going to be, and then we'll do our first episode of the show. So my name is Dratnos. I'm a rogue player. I play rogue. I play Mythic Plus. So I do the weekly route series on Raider.io, where I make routes for every dungeon each week with the affixes. Personally, I'm 3.3k or something this season. Last season I was nearly top 10 in rogues worldwide. Then I'm also a raider. I raid with Poetry Club on Titanforge, where I'm a elemental shaman now, but usually I play rogue. And we are working on Uu'nat right now. We got it below 10%, but we're closing in on a kill, but we don't have it quite yet. And I also tried to compete in the most recent MDI. That was the first MDI I tried to compete in. We didn't quite make it to any of the cups, but we got a solid 5 minutes short by the third cup, so this is a good effort that we put in. Trell, how about you?
You guys competed in all three. I mean, that's all that matters.
Yeah, that's true. We competed in all 3 time trials, although, after the first, one, it's kind of, there was no real, structural incentive to keep competing if you weren't going to win from that point, but we did anyway, for the glory. All right, Trell, how about you? Who are you? Tell us about yourself.
I'm Trell. I'm a Brewmaster player, but I haven't played Brewmaster in some time because by law I'm forced to play a Protection Warrior right now. I have a Wowhead guide for Brewmaster. I am just a general tank player for Mythic Plus. That's what I enjoy about the game. I also raid in Encore, top 10 US guild generally. But I won't be Mythic raiding for too much longer just because I want more time for Mythic Plus. I also competed in this last MDI with a different group than I play with on live, but we at least made it to 1 cup. We didn't do so hot in the other 2 time trials, but it was fun either way. Right there with Dratnos.
Yeah, definitely not quite right there with me, a little ahead of me, but
it was close enough. Come on.
Yeah, close enough. All right, we'll take it. And then a person whose face you may have actually seen at the MDI is in fact Tettles. Tettles, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, as the most washed up player here, I've elected to go the casting route as opposed to the playing route. I believe that it is, in fact, the way to win the MDI correctly. I play Balance Druid. I also write the Wowhead guide for Balance Druid. I am currently raiding in the guild Might. Rest in peace, AK. Might, pretty good, 12-hour week guild. Beyond that, I also enjoy raid and Mythic Plus pretty equally, similar to these guys as well. I also wrote a State of the Affixes article recently for Wowhead. I do a lot of random stuff, and then I think overall we're just 3 highly skilled PvE players who know a lot about the game.
Certainly, we are three PvE players who claim to know a lot about the game.
We try.
Yeah, we try. So
we all come from different aspects at least. We all play different roles. Tettles kind of range DPS, Dratnos melee DPS. Although he's playing Shaman, right? I play the tank role. The only thing we're missing is really a healer, right?
Yeah, so we're LFG a healer for this podcast? No, we're not. We're not actually. Yeah, that's the roles that we play.
I healed 22s last night as Resto Druid. I think that counts.
That does count.
Good.
Yeah, it's certainly easier to get into keys these days as Resto than Balance. But that's gonna be.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
That's gonna be something that we save for a little bit later in the show when we talk about class balance at the MDI and class balance in the Mythic Plus. For starters, we want to just take a couple minutes to talk about what the show is going to be, what you can expect from us every week. So first off, we are going to try and be a weekly podcast with episodes airing this time every week on Twitch. And then we're going to have episodes posted to each of our YouTube channels in the coming days. I know we'll figure out exactly a cadence on how long between air and YouTube release based on how hard it is to do all that. And then we will also release on iTunes and anywhere you can get a podcast is the goal at the same time as YouTube, ideally. So that's the plan for where you'll be able to find the show. We're going to focus on high-end World of Warcraft PvE. We're not going to touch Classic, really. We're going to focus on Live, like Battle for Azeroth, and then whatever the next expansion is after that. We're going to talk about Mythic Plus and Raid. We're going to leave PvP. I personally am not an expert on that. I don't know if you guys dabble in PvP, but that's not me.
I'm a real PvP gamer. I got the BFA Freelo Gladiator, and I'm a 2.2k healer, so I'm actually very bad, but I get some budget gear, so we're in there.
Okay, I made it to Duelist also in BFA Season 1, so pretty big shot here. This season I'm 1600 on my Shaman.
Yeah, you need to hit up Hassan.
Yeah, I do. That's how I got to 1600.
Player this expansion. I'm pretty peaceful about it. I just go to the dungeons, man.
Are you war mode off?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm war mode on when I play my rogue because it's just free AP and you just vanish whenever anybody of the opposite faction shows up. It's real immersive. Okay, yeah. So that's what we're gonna be. The scope of our show is gonna be M Plus and Raid. We're gonna talk about current events. We're gonna talk about the newest raids. We're gonna talk about whatever's happening in the MDI, other esports that are related to WoW PvE, if anything other than the MDI shows up there. The World First Race definitely, I guess, qualifies as that. So we will discuss that. But we're also gonna, in addition to having like current events and editorial content on that side, we're gonna try and have educational episodes as well. So we'll talk about how to do different things in M+, in Raid, how to be a Raid leader, how to be the leader of an M+ group, how to play different roles in M+, how to attack different dungeons, different affixes, different raid bosses, that sort of thing. Those are all episode topics that you may see from us in the future. And we're, of course, open to feedback on those, so keep sending that our way, or I guess start sending that our way, since we haven't started yet. Okay, so that's the plan for the show. We're also hoping to have some various guests on the show, great high-end PvE players from time to time. So if that fits, if you're listening to the show now and you're like, hey, I'm a high-end PvE player, hit us up and we'll see if we can find a time to get you on the show and have you talk about something that you want to talk about. So that's our plan. That's our plan for the podcast. This week's topic. Oh yeah, and we do have a Q&A segment planned. Also that we'll do in our shows, assuming we have some good questions in chat, so that'll be also there potentially. So this show, our focus, we're going to start by talking about the MDI, the Mythic Dungeon International, and we're going to start by talking about class balance at it, because this is kind of one of the things that you notice when you tune into the WoW stream. Most of the comments in the Twitch chat are about the similarity between the compositions of all the different groups on the screen. So we wanted to take time to address this and talk about what you're going to see at the MDI in terms of what classes people are playing. So to start off, Tettles, as an MDI announcer, I guess or commentator, you have some experience talking about this, on that very stream. What is your kind of top line analysis of class balance in the MDI?
I mean, so there's some real rigidity in terms of the balancing of just the classes in general. So obviously we were seeing these double rogue comps, which is really bad because obviously you really want one rogue for one shroud. Most of the time you get significant diminishing returns on the second shroud, so a second rogue is normally pretty bad, but you're seeing two, so that's pretty questionable a lot of the time. Then you got the Windwalker Monk or the Unholy DK. Basically you bring an Unholy DK if you actually believe that you can pull the dungeon in some way that's insane, you have Waycrest Manor, million DPS pulls, freehold, that kind of thing. And then for tank and healer, I don't think we've seen anything except for a Prot Warrior and a Resto Druid yet, because Prot Warrior does a boatload of DPS, and then Resto Druid, I think it's just so I think it's just the easiest healer to play. And then in addition to that, if you ever wanted to swap to a Mistweaver Monk or something else, it's really challenging in terms of how many swaps you have available. So you're also kind of limited in terms of class balance just by structure of how the swaps work in the MDI.
Yeah, so the rule on that was that every time between each map, you could only change one person's character.
Yeah.
So you could only change actually one race or class or both per map, which meant that if you played a Mistweaver, right, you couldn't change to Resto Druid and change your Windwalker to a Unholy. at the same time, which was a problem for a lot of potential 2-map sequences. Now, I don't think that was too much. Like, I think even if that rule weren't to exist, you'd see pretty much the same comps in most of these spots, but you maybe would have seen it. I don't know. It's tough to imagine still seeing a Mistweaver in any of these spots, though, over the rest of
I think Underaw would have had Mistweaver comps for sure.
Yeah,
but the problem was you can't go from, like, Shrine to Underaw and just swap the rest of Druid to Mistweaver because you needed to go from Windwalker to DK as well. So they were limited by that and just played Druid.
We also saw a lot of issues with going from like Dwarf for necrotic stuff, like Dwarf with the DK to like a Dwarf tank, the Dwarf Prot Warrior with a Death Knight player to Night Elf tank with not a DK player. So like that became an issue at some points too.
Yeah, we saw this particularly in Freehold in the third week of West Cups, right, where it was necrotic Freehold, so everybody wanted to be on DK and Dwarf Prot Warrior, and then in the other maps they wanted to be on Night Elf Prot Warrior and Windwalker, and teams made different decisions about which of those priorities was more important, which was interesting, but also meant that people were kind of just playing scuffed comps in some of these dungeons.
So do you think that we would actually see a different tank if Prot Warrior couldn't actually be Night Elf Trell? Or do you think that it's just like a two-fronted thing where Prot Warrior does like insane damage and can be Night Elf? Because for like dungeons like Shrine of the Storm, I don't think there's any way that you bring a non-Night Elf tank just because of how you end up skipping all the reaping and everything.
Yeah, I'm glad you said Shrine. So basically, I was planning on playing Paladin, and I'm sure many others were for Shrine because of the extreme magic damage and how Bubble Taunt would work with the snap spots and all that. But then you realize Paladins can't be Night Elf, so you can't do any of the 3 Shadow Meld skips that are essentially required to time the key in a fast. And so not only are you locked into playing Warrior because of the major overpowered defensive and offensive bonuses that they have right now, you're also locked into it because they can be Night Elf and other tanks can't, like Paladin.
Yeah, unfortunate.
Yeah, we played a Paladin in our King's Rest time trial because we played Horde in that dungeon, which was a huge error. But at the time we
is it because you thought you needed it for the Shadow Zul?
We thought Blood Elf would be good, right? And our thought at the time was that like, hey, we couldn't, the dungeon's pretty linear. It's going to be hard to meld all that effectively here. Turns out that wasn't true, but we didn't actually get to spend all that much time practicing King's Rest to test melds in it. We kind of came to King's Rest with like 2 hours left of practice, so we just put on the Blood Elves and played a Prot Pally. But in general, just the tank balance is like pretty skewed, right? Like even if you could play Prot Pally in these spots, Prot Warrior is it brings so much to these dungeons. It's like
it's crazy. Like usually one tank is like pretty overpowered to the point where you want to play that one tank rather than the other 5. But in this case, it's like 4 or 5 steps above every other tank, where you have to play the tank no matter what. Even if you're like significantly better at bear, you probably have to play Prot Warrior, even if you just played it for the first time for something like MDI.
I mean, I think Blood Death Knight was almost like that last MDI, but that was also because of Consumption Leech to some degree too. Because Consumption Leech would almost like trivialize like a ton of pulls, and it would just make you not even need a healer for a lot of stuff, just because of how your group was able to get topped back up.
Yeah, so the Prot Warrior, I don't know, it's pretty clearly like a couple cuts above the others right now. Now, whether that's a question of Prot Warrior needing to be nerfed or other tanks needing to be buffed, I think it's honestly, I think with the way that threat works, it's the other tanks need to be buffed, because when you play one of the other tanks right now, you just have so much trouble like surviving and getting threat on mobs. So I think that the other tanks need a kick upwards rather than Prot Warrior needing a kick downwards. But
that would definitely be the dream. I don't think they're gonna do that though. If you think about the realistic state of balancing a game, they're gonna nerf 1 spec rather than buffing 5 specs.
Yeah,
unfortunately, and so we're kind of screwed until they nerf Warrior into the ground and then slowly bring all the tanks back up like they always do. You
had this tweet though, Tettles, right? Or not Tettles, Trell, that was like, I was doing a 20 on my Prot Warrior and I took less damage per pull than when I was doing a 15 on a Brewmaster, right?
Yep. I 100% take more damage on any 15 on my Brewmaster than I do on my Warrior, and I need 20. Balance is so bad right now.
So that's the state of tank balance, and that's why we're seeing all these Prot Warriors. And it certainly doesn't help that they can be Night Elves, because we see these 5 Night Elf compositions, or at least everybody's either a Night Elf or a Rogue, so that they have access to Shadow Melt or Vanish.
Or both.
Yeah, or both. A lot of teams were playing at least one Dwarf Rogue, though. Having one of the Rogues be a Night Elf was kind of useful in a couple spots, because, like, in some spots you'd actually want to do, like, Vanish skips and Meld within the next 2 minutes, so you'd see a lot of teams that were actually one Night Elf Rogue, one Dwarf Rogue, which, you know, diversity.
Yeah. Real diverse.
But yeah, other than that, it's pretty much all Night Elves all the way down. And another spec that Night Elves can be is Resto Druid, right? So we have all the healers were Resto Druids as far as I can remember. There might have been one Holy Paladin or something somewhere along the way, but I think that Resto Druid, one of the problems that we have here is like all of the other specs we talked about. Okay, so the Prot Warriors, the Outlaw Rogues, the Windwalkers, with the exception of the Unholy Death Knights, none of those have a combat res. And so the Resto Druid slot is just so hard to get away from when it has access to that combat res that even if you wanted to, you just couldn't justify bringing a different spec. Now, in practice, you probably wouldn't want to as well because Resto Druid brings absurd AoE DPS compared to the other healing specs. It brings a kind of a mana regeneration, like a mana efficiency that is much better than the other specs as well. And yeah, it's really well suited to Mythic Plus because you can do effective healing before each pull starts, which is not something that the other specs can do. So all those things kind of combine to make Resto Druid really, really strong in M+. And there's actually kind of a balancing problem that they have with Resto Druid, as far as I can tell, is that it's not overpowered in Raid. If anything, it's like, you know, it's middle of the pack or slightly below middle of the pack in Raid. And it's unclear what parts of the kit you could actually target to bring Resto Druid down in Mythic Plus without hurting it in Raid. So I think that if there were to be a balancing solution to Resto Druid, it would have to be, there'd have to be bringing some parts of the kit up that were targeted at Raid and some parts of the kit down that were targeted at M+.
I mean, you have to almost make Wild Growth like inefficient to even cast for that class to even be like remotely okay. Like Wild Growth maybe could hit like 8 targets and do almost half the effective healing that it does right now, and maybe it's like a little bit better. But the issue is that they get like a lot of external mastery value from like random traits like Rampant Growth and just like a lot of their Azerite traits will give them like 1 stack of mastery hots on stuff, and they should not be getting mastery hots from like talents or Azerite or anything else. Like it's like the issue is that they end up stacking too much mastery and they can just passively heal like you were stating without actually like being in healer form. Like they could just like pre-hot the tank and then just sit in cat form and DPS the whole entire time. And it's just like a lot of their DPS is also low-hanging fruit in terms of like Sunfiring a pack is just so easy and so efficient.
Yeah, that one Sunfire Global, like even if you can only get one Sunfire Global in each pack, which you always can, that Sunfire Global is doing like 4k DPS or something, which is, you know, absurd.
Yeah, every other healer has to choose if they're going to DPS or heal, but Resto Druid gets full.
Well, Resto Druid does have to, like, they have to make the choice.
Dispriest doesn't either, but like...
Yeah.
Dispriest doesn't either, but like Dispriest is like so bad by comparison. All like pretty much all the healing situations are like balanced around having a Resto Druid for some reason. Like think of like Galvast or just think of Grievous as an affix. It's literally balanced around like Resto Druid healing and how it ends up working out. So it's kind of strange that they've chosen Resto Druid as the premier healer to balance the game around for Mythic Plus.
Dispriest has kind of the opposite problem of Resto Druid, right? Where Dispriest, if they were to buff it at all for Mythic Plus, they might overpower it in raids, because in raids it's already one of the best healing specs by far for most raid encounters. Like most guilds want that first and second good Disc Priest before the rest of their healing core, if they could choose who to get into it. So you're put in the spot where it's like, okay, it's unclear how you're going to make the spec better at M+, without making it just unbelievable at raid. So yeah, it's kind of two sides of the same coin there on class balance there. All right, so that's the healings and the tanks. And then we do have the DPS spots. We talked a little bit about the rogues. The one for the shrouds, I don't know, the second rogue and the second shroud is used. Like, there are spots where you use the second shroud, but it's not the huge part of why you bring the second rogue.
Good, right? I don't even think the second shroud is actually even that good. Like a lot of the time, I think literally that outlaw rogue just does insane damage.
It gets you in and out of a couple extra spots, like in Temple, right? You use the second shroud on cooldown, or like within the first shroud's cooldown. In a Tall Desire, it makes skipping out of Volkal's room easier.
Not only that, sometimes you end up using both shrouds in the run on CD while the other one's on cooldown, so you get use out of both. But in addition to that, while you practice for a limited time, you can shroud any pack you want and go to whatever pool you want right after. So like it actually makes practicing way more efficient just to have 2 rogues and invisibility classes, because you can just get to anywhere you want in the dungeon instantly without having to waste 10 minutes or maybe having to reset the dungeon because you wiped on a pull and getting there again, getting less timing back up. Time efficiency in practice is really important with the new MDI system.
Yeah,
only like 2 days.
That's another thing we didn't talk about, and I don't think that the reason people like, I think teams would bring 2 rogues no matter how much time they had to practice these dungeons. But I think you're right that it is a nice thing that second rogue brings, is that it helps improve the practicing. So the way the MDI worked, right, is that there was a 48-hour window between when you learned what the dungeons would be, and then you had 48 hours where you could practice an unlimited amount of times, and then you had your actual runs begin, right? You got to do 5 times of each dungeon, and you couldn't do any more practice runs. So because of that, there was a heavy incentive for teams to really pack as much, like you wanted your entire team to be available for 30 of those 48 hours if possible or more. And that was what, that's what that model encouraged. We've seen different kinds of degeneracy encouraged by previous MDI models, right? We had the 7-week time trial window where you could try as many times as you want, and whatever time you got best counted. Unclear which one, those both have problems associated with them, but my suspicion is that 48 hours of practice is worse than either 0 hours of practice or 7 days of practice for this tournament. So I think that either of those 2 times would be a better number. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Okay, so obviously I didn't compete in this one, so there's a little bit of caveat to that. But dude, the 7 days of practice was actually just the worst possible thing, and that was miserable.
Well, that wasn't
from,
practice, right? That was like time, those were actual time trial runs, right? So you had to always be full.
Yeah,
on,
so I
right?
would just slam as soon as I basically would just post out a raid that week, and we literally just gamed every single available hour that we had, and it was a huge issue for player burnout. So the 48 hours is a little bit better for player burnout, and I'm sure you guys don't feel as horrible post MDI as I necessarily did, because not only did we have the 48 hours, NA was the last regional cup that season 2, so then we had 6 weeks after time trials to practice for our broadcast day, and it was entirely too much practice. But I don't think I disagree with you in the sense of 48 hours is too much. I think I would almost like to see you guys kind of go in cold with just 5 straight up attempts.
Yeah,
but that also has different issues to some degree as well.
It certainly has some problems with it as well, but there's no solution that doesn't have some problems with it, right? So
I would agree with that. Yeah.
In the end, I think if everyone has equal time to practice, the best team is going to perform the best anyway. Even if it's 7 weeks or 2 days, anywhere on that.
Well, you'd expect the longer teams have to prepare, the more that the best team is going to win, right? Every time.
Yep.
I think so, and I think that I don't know. Assuming that the best team actually can compete, has that much time available for themselves as well, which is not always true, but is generally true.
It's hard to say what they should do for the time allotment for time trials. I don't know. I think team synergy is more important than practice time, honestly. I think if you play together a lot on live or the weeks leading up to the tournament and everyone has a good knowledge of the dungeons beforehand, you just instantly gain hours of time that you could have spent during time trials, learning the dungeons or the bosses or certain strategies that you might end up using.
Yeah, so that's something that is true of this MDI that wasn't as true of previous MDIs, like Legion MDIs, was that your time spent together as a team on live was translated very close to a 1-to-1 ratio to practice time, compared to previous MDIs. Because the previous MDI is okay, we're doing this Mauve Souls pull that is completely alien to anything you would pull in Mauve Souls on live. You're pulling 5 times as many mobs at once.
That was awful.
Yeah, so what that meant is that you didn't have to play with people that you necessarily played with on live, and teams that did all play together on live would not necessarily have a huge advantage over teams that had not done so. Whereas this MDI was if you'd been playing together for the past 3 months with your team, that was rewarded, and I don't actually have a problem with that. I think that's fine, right? I think that's an okay thing to incentivize.
I agree, even though I kind of got the short end of the stick on that one.
Yeah, me too. I played with people that I'd never set foot in. I'd never set foot with those 5 people in a key in live all at once. Like I mean, I'd done keys with maybe 2 of the 5 of them, and 2 of them I just never played with. And we kind of assumed that based on how previous MDIs had worked that would be okay, right? And we would just be able to like, it would just be completely different. But it wasn't, which I think is a good thing. I think that it's good at like the keys were sufficiently high that it kind of mirrored high keys on live. Like, it was easier than high keys on live, but not. It was close enough that you could see that they were the same game at least.
Yeah, they were closer to the same size pools for sure. Like even the biggest pools of note that I can remember, maybe the first room in King's Rest altogether. That's not a live pool. People couldn't figure that out until time trial, basically because they had unlimited attempts on practice time at least. But that pool is still only twice the size of a live pool in the end, whereas Mob Souls pools were like 5 times the size, like you were saying.
Literal full deck. You had the whole entire pool in front of Harbron. You had double Swiftblade pack plus the dogs, because that made sense too. I don't know, that dungeon was just bad for time trials, but like I'm trying to think. I don't know if it actually is better for player burnout though, in terms of how much time you end up putting in, because I just remember feeling so exhausted after last MDI, but I don't really necessarily remember if that was because of our broadcast day being so much later, or if the time trials themselves were just excruciatingly painful to be able to deal with.
Yeah, probably a combination of those 2 factors.
It was definitely both, but I don't know. How did you guys feel like post MDI? Do you guys still feel like you enjoy like MDI style stuff, or are you more like, all right, I'm done with that, that was miserable?
I for sure still enjoy it. I'll do it again if I have a group of 5 guys that I play with on live, for sure. I don't know if I'll do it again if it's the same format and I don't have the same team as I had practiced with. That's up for a debate. But what do you feel, Adrenos?
Yeah, for me, I wouldn't run back the exact same circumstances that I ran this time. Like, I definitely wouldn't go with a team. Okay, so like the individuals I played with, I really like all the people I played with, and I would absolutely play with any combination of them again, but I would definitely want to have played with them on live for a long time beforehand. And I think I'd also, like, one problem our team ran into is we practiced for like 12 of the 48 hours that were available in the practice window, which I think if I were to, like, knowing now what the structure is, I'd want to play with a team that could do at least 24 of those hours, if not more, because it's it's so, like, those hours are so good for getting practice in. But yeah, I mean, I came out of it wanting like okay, so I would like to do the MDI again, but I would need to go harder, right? I don't think I could do it again at the same lower intensity.
Yeah, you got to do it at a point where it's worth it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of that, when is the LAN coming up for this first season of MDI at Tettles? Is it June 7th through 9th? Is that what I read?
Early June, yeah. I think it's first weekend.
Okay, yeah. So that's the upcoming MDI Season 1 Cup, or final, I guess, LAN.
Yeah. Do you expect to see like a major shift in terms of like the Season 2 comp diversities that we expect to see, or do you think that we're going to end up seeing more of the same? I know that we're going to probably have essences between now and then, so it might be a little bit different, or a lot of bit different, I guess, but like... Well,
first week of June, do you think there will be essences? Maybe. Oh,
no, not for the LAN, for the next...
Oh, for Season 2. Okay, yeah, so we will definitely have essences by Season 2.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I have no idea when Season 2 is, but I would assume that essences are out before then.
Definitely. I would be amazed if they weren't.
The meta will be quite different, for sure. I think tanks will be wild.
I think it's still going to be a triple melee meta, I guess, is another thing that I want to ask, is like, because a lot of the Mythic Plus meta is right now is dictated by melee kicks, and having that 15-second interrupt is like a pretty big deal for a lot of packs. Do you think that we're still going to see a triple melee meta?
Well, all right. As a new enhancement or elemental shaman main, I am obligated to inform you that elemental shaman does have a 12-second kick. So
yeah,
the part
and Resto Shaman also has an interrupt.
Resto Shaman does have an interrupt, and I have
That's true.
I've done Resto keys, or keys with a Resto Shaman where we've had the 5 like kicks, 2 12-second kicks, and 3 15-second kicks. We did the first boss of Underrot, and like 3 of us overlapped kick, and it did not matter. Boss was still just.
That's pretty good.
It was just a free for all kick.
The Underrot that you need.
Yeah, it was fine. It was fine. So.
Well, I'll tell you what. If the 12-second kick becomes a necessity, I think Shaman's in. Maybe even rest of Shaman. Right now, it's just kind of like a luxury.
Yeah, there are a couple mobs, right, where you benefit from having the 12-second kick, right? Like Lashers in Underrot, Thugs in Toldagor, those sorts of things. But like you can always control them with a knock or a stun, the ones that are stunnable, and wait for the 15-second kick to come back up that way. So it's not the end of the world to not have the 12-second one. It is the end of the world in a couple spots though to not have access to enough 15-second kicks, and that's one of the problems with ranged and Mythic Plus, right? Like you bring a Hunter, you bring a Balanced Druid, you bring a Shadow Priest. Balanced Druids and Shadow Priests in particular miss the 25-second kicks, like the Mending Rapids and stuff, right? Like that is a big problem with those two specs, or with those two ranged. Yeah, I guess they're specs, sort of. Shadow Priest is spec, Hunter's is class.
Balanced Druid is way better than that. The Solar Beam is actually just like either like brokenly OP or just like trash awful. There's almost no in between just because of how it ends up being used. But yeah, ranged interrupts in general, not exactly a hot commod. And okay, so I think that the kick should be almost balanced around the 24-second interrupt that ranged DPS does. General range DPS do have, but at the same time, I think I don't want to see something like what we have in Raid right now, where every composition is full range, because that's also not healthy.
I agree. I think there needs to be a balance where Legion double range was great because there weren't that many kicks to get every 15 seconds. There were hardly ever, and if there were only like a tank kick and a melee kick, and then range could take care of the other kicks that are in the. But right now, there's like 3 or 4 melee kicks needed for every pull in some cases.
Pay. It's just so
yeah. And even the packs where like only range kicks are required, melee kicks are still really good at reducing damage in those packs.
Yep. And so like if they reduce it from like 3 to 4 melee kicks required to 2 max per pull, and then maybe put in some range timer kicks, I think that would help greatly.
Yeah,
you could get away with double range again for sure.
You even see this problem on bosses, like second boss of the Shrine of the Storm. Like if you bring too many range to your group, you actually just run out of kicks, and you have searing or the slicing blast kicks just get missed.
That's not like the worst thing. Like you'll end up having one go off every like reset cycle.
Yeah, every 6 kicks or whatever. Yeah, which it is fine. Like you just get in the ward or whatever, you drop your stacks, you're okay. And if you're 700 IQ, you can actually time it so that you'll be in the ward when the cast goes off. But I've never been smart enough to coordinate that.
I mean, it's not really that bad, I don't think, because that slicing maelstrom doesn't do damage, but it's just like a point to say, like, why is that kick even being missed? Why is that even a thing that could happen potentially, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it is just.
It's just a byproduct of the issue, not necessarily like.
Yeah, and part of the problem is just that like teams are going to pull until they can't pull anymore, and often the limiting factor that you run into, given that in Battle for Azeroth so many mobs have important kicks, is just how many mobs can we pull that have important kicks at once. And range says, I don't help with this, right? Like I only count as half of a kick against these, so you have one like fewer mob you can add. Yeah.
BM Hunter does like insane damage, but you're not ever going to see them because they don't have a good kick. It's part of the issue too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we actually saw Ellie in the MDI, like pretty consistently from Pualuka, but like he ended up having to swap to Windwalker Monk just because of Shadow Meld stuff. I don't know. There's just like a lot of issues with not having the perfect composition for MDI.
Yeah, Shadow Meld in particular is it's really warping because it's like impossible to play any spec that can't play Night Elf.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a problem for sure. But overall, I mean, okay, so those are the problems with spec balance and MDI. Now, one thing that I think is important to note is that like spec balance is not the only type of balance and like competitive gameplay that you can get in a tournament, right? And like the MDI, despite the fact that you're seeing a lot of teams that are running the same comps against each other every time, like you're more likely than not when you see an MDI match, you're going to see 2 teams playing the same comp against each other. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of interesting and creative gameplay that the teams are able to do. Even though there's not much creativity in selecting a composition, there's a lot of creativity in designing the route. And I think that sometimes that gets lost when we discuss the balance of the classes. And I think it's just important to remember that is good about it. And the routes are like some of the routes that teams have come up with, particularly Method EU, have been works of art in these dungeons. And that there's a real skill component to this still, and it's not just like everybody's doing the exact same thing at each other.
it's definitely something to be said about that Waycrest Manor in the last West Cup. That was that was a prime example of a wild route.
Yeah, that. So I was streaming our team do time trials do time trials for the Waycrest, and we went early. We went before every other team, and I was like elated when we got like a 23-minute Waycrest. I was like, this is so much better than I was expecting us to get from our practice runs. I was like,
I know where this is going.
This is great, and you just see Method E just like 17 minutes. I'm just like,
you just look at that, and you're like, what?
Yeah, that's you.
Yeah.
You all see that on the other screen, and you open up MDT and you go, how do I shave off 6 minutes?
Yeah, I mean,
Let's see. That pull.
It's actually just every pull was like
into the boss,
and that's the thing is like
this huge pull into the boss. It was like
all the pulls we were doing were like we tried to make them bigger. We tried to pull them all bigger, and we died. Like, oh,
they were all bloodlust like sized pulls into the boss, and it was like you'd sit there and you look at them, and you're like, how does a team do that? I just like looked at the 17 minutes and I knew instantly it had to be like the Acolytes and Toads into Heartsbane Triad, like all the trash Reaping and Milady and Matron Brindle into the Goliath, and like all of Rawl's trash, and it had to be like all of Lord and Lady Waycrest trash, and you're like, well, I guess they only had 2 lusts, so I wonder where they used them.
Yeah. Yeah.
They also had that weird Gorak tool ledge too that I didn't even know existed until that, so that was really cool.
Yeah, the spot that causes the horror spawn to not leap.
Yeah,
they're smart players. Mm-hmm. Not only did they come up with these insane pulls and execute them well, they also came up with some good strats on bosses that we haven't seen before, like that snap spot that everyone uses on left.
Yeah,
so we appreciate that.
So,
dude, you actually get wrecked as a tank in that spot from the Gloom Horrors?
Only on Necrotic. I mean, they melee you kind of a medium damage. So if there's a few of them, if there's 2 up, it's not a bad thing unless it's Necrotic. I mean, otherwise, you have to probably let them go away and keep them Vortex or something for a little bit to reset, but in general, it's not.
Okay. So yeah, that's our summary, I guess, of the state of the MDI. From the class balance perspective, it's very warped. It's a very of the 36 specs, you're seeing 5 of them, and that's not great. But there's a lot to like about the MDI, and we do like those things. So that's our MDI portion of the podcast. Let's move on to our next topic here, where it's also an M+ topic. This is inspired by Tettles' own article on Wowhead. So let me pull it up here on the screen. The Great Affix Dilemma of 2K19. I don't know how you got 2K19 here into your article title.
All right, well, dude, it was okay. So I initially titled that as a meme. I was not intending it to actually go live as the title, and then it went live as the title. I was like, wait, what? Why? I was like, all right, well, we named this Great, so I guess this is gonna be fun.
All right, so the Great Affix Dilemma of 2K19 in Mythic Plus Dungeons by Tettles. So if anybody wants to read this, I'll put the link here in chat. If you want to read along, here it is, and we'll have it linked in the descriptions of the YouTubes and in the descriptions of the podcast, wherever you find this podcast. If I've done my job, there should be links to this article there. And the basic premise of this article is that affixes are in a tough spot balance wise, and we have kind of a push weak / dead weak dynamic as a result of that. Tettles, I don't know. Is that a fair summary of your article? Yeah.
So initially, I approached it with what I thought about affixes in terms of like how they were balanced in the dungeons, and then like, so I as a person, I don't like how the affixes end up interacting with the dungeons. I think overall they have just a little bit too much agency over how restrictive they are in terms of like the key levels, and I feel like they just bring a little bit too much. But that's me as a person. Overall, I think it's really easy to point out, though, that the affixes are very imbalanced from like a affix to affix and a week to week scale, and then we end up having that like push week dilemma where it's like some weeks are like so free, you end up having like a skittish with like a raging or something, or then you end up having bolstering and explosive, and it's like, wait, all right, well that's actually just toxic, and I don't want to do this.
Yeah, Trell, what do you think about the state of these affixes here in Mythic Plus?
I think every week some dungeons are like phenomenally easier than others. So let's take this current week for example, and Tettles did a good job of explaining why these affixes are hard. This week is Sanguine, Necrotic, Fortified, and probably the worst thing that comes to mind is Motherload.
Mm-hmm.
Not only is Motherload just hard on Fortified at the time because you have so much trash to go through, and he mentioned this in his article as well. But you also have Necrotic, and there's not much space to kite at first when you're in the dungeon. You have Sanguine on top of all that, which has the potential to full heal any Peacekeeper robot you pull at any given moment because they just pause and do nothing for 15 seconds straight sometimes.
But Trell, why don't you just pull Masterminds?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you could stop the cast of the Masterminds getting... Oh, no. I'm sorry. You could stop the mech jockeys from getting the Peacekeepers and lose 12 count, only to make that up later in the dungeon by pulling Masterminds, which probably like two-shot the tank on Fortified. I don't think you want to do that either.
Yeah, definitely the only way to beat Motherloads is to pull as many Peacekeepers as you can. Yeah, that's the thing, right? Is that like there are some dungeons that are hypersensitive to some or all affixes. I think Motherload is a good example where Sanguine, Fortified, Bolstering, like any week where any of those affixes is active, it's really hard to push keys in Motherload. And if multiple of them are active like they are this week, it's a dead key, right? You can't go in there. Like there are teams I was talking to that are like trying to time 26s this week and have depleted 22 Motherloads, which is, that's rough out there.
And to be fair, you can play around the Sanguine, and if you do it just right, you could time a 24. There's actually one team that's timed a 24 Motherload this week, and that's Fem and Shelly. That's pretty impressive to me. That's a really hard one.
Yeah, that's insane. Those are some insane gamers, for sure.
Yeah, and that being said, you can do it on a 25, though, significantly easier on a tyrannical week with different affixes.
So Motherload's a good example of a dungeon like that. I think Siege of Borealis is another good example where there are a bunch of affixes that make Siege really difficult to play. So it's another one where you're really looking for like a push week only. Whereas by contrast, I think a dungeon like the Underrot is a good example of one where there are no affixes that are really that unplayable in there. Like both Tyrannical and Fortified present challenges, but they present different challenges, and it's fairly well balanced. And the same is true for all of the level 4 and 7 affixes. Like I can't really think of one where I'm like, this affix in the Underrot is unplayable. So I think that there, in addition to there being an affix design problem that you bring up in your article here, there's also a dungeon design problem where like some dungeons are just really well designed, like Underrot, in that they don't make any, like none of the affixes are awful in there.
I think there are like major challenges with balancing this many affixes around that many dungeons. There's just like so many affixes, plus there's like seasonal affixes and stuff like that, and then you have 10 dungeons to balance them around. Plus, I guess we're gonna have Mechagon eventually too, and it's just like it's just a lot to be able to deal with. I do understand that they've been like aggressively trying to like patch and buff and nerf stuff, obviously making like the on death affixes of bolstering, bursting, and sanguine not affect some mobs, but even then it still feels like a lot for a lot of the dungeons. It still feels terrible. Like the minions of Zul and King's Rest still give on death affixes, and it's like
that's ridiculous. Those are the worst offenders for like bolstering.
The dogs in Wickrest Manor do too. The initiates and Shrine of the Storm. There's still a lot of mobs that like give on death affixes that almost shouldn't, just because of how they end up working and just how many of them there are.
Yeah, that was shocking to me reading those patch notes where it said minor mobs will no longer deal on death affix effects.
That was the best change I've ever seen. Like,
I read
personally,
that, I was like so excited, and then all of a sudden, almost every single one of them still do it.
Yeah.
They only did it to like 2 mobs.
It's like half of them, I guess. Half of the ones that you would expect it to not work on, but like that was a really good change. But they didn't, I guess, follow all the way through with it. They could finish it off.
Yeah.
I mean, so my first point of the whole entire article is that Tyrannical and Fortified should not exist, and dungeon scaling is plenty. I think that's also like one of the biggest issues for a lot of dungeons. We have dungeons like King's Rest, Tyrannical and Fortified are just wildly different in that dungeon. And then overall, I think like just dungeon scaling should just be enough. Just like point and simple, just because of how exponential scaling on the key levels ends up working out.
Yeah, I think that the goal is to like make it feel different week to week, right? That's the thing with affixes is to make you play differently and have things feel different week to week. But I agree that Fortified and Tyrannical like is not. I don't know. There's too much of like, Tol Dagor is a fortified dungeon. Ataldazar is a tyrannical dungeon. These sorts of things where it's just like that. This dungeon is done on this sort of week, and other dungeons are done on the other weeks. And I think that is something that isn't great. What do you think about Fortified and Tyrannical Trial?
I think Fortified, I mean, I like the balance of Fortified and Tyrannical affecting dungeons differently, and I like the affixes by themselves. I don't know if I would say remove them completely, but I would say limit the amount of affixes that work together in addition to Fortified or Tyrannical. So, like, maybe taking out 4 affixes and keeping 3 would be better than, say, something where we're in Season 1, for example, Infested, Bolstering, and Fortified all together. And almost every single dungeon just insanely harder than the other weeks. It was like that combination alone was just terrible.
One of the best things I think about Reaping is that it is like hard coded to not interact with the other affixes, and I think that if we saw that with like all the affixes, such that they just did not interact with each other, I think we'd see a much when you're dealing with Reaping, Reaping is already its own thing, and it doesn't need to be different when Necrotic is active, right? That doesn't need to be its own special hell.
Yeah, I mean, they did a really good job of making it not interact with the fixes, and they actually learned a lot from Infested, I think, in that regard.
I agree.
But the fact that Sloot said on his stream whenever he went to Irvine and had that summit, it was like he came back and said that they thought Reaping was too easy. I was just like, wait, what? I was like, that sounds so bad.
Yeah,
I was like,
okay.
Like, wait, no, don't make backwards progress.
My perspective is that Reaping is by far the best affix they've ever designed for this game. Not particularly close. I don't know what you guys think about this, but for me, Reaping single-handedly renewed my faith in. Well, okay, I still had faith before, but it bolstered my faith in Mythic Plus.
Well, I won't say bolster, but yeah.
Okay, it increased my faith in Mythic Plus. It reverse bolstered my faith.
I think you might be right. So, like, in terms of like how it was designed, I actually think it ends up being really good because it doesn't interact with the fix. All of the mobs are like they're like different because you end up getting the Grave Bolters, you end up getting like the Shadow Smash guys. Like all the mobs end up giving you like a different mob relative to what they originally were, and then like you're able to pull it into other things if you're in a good coordinated group. And I think that's the issue with it that they have with Reaping, is that they don't want to see you pulling Reaping into other things, but at the same time I feel like if it was too hard that you have to do it by itself, it would be miserable. Whereas if it's undertuned to where you're actually able to pull it into other stuff, then it feels like good balance wise.
Yeah, it's like, okay, regardless of how hard the affixes are, we are gonna pull bigger until stuff is very hard, right? So they may as well make the affixes easy enough that everybody else, and like when they all interact simultaneously and like we're on already hard pull, we don't just hate everything, right? I don't know. I think that like that kind of creativity as well that you see with Reaping, I think that's what they wanted us to have with Infested, and I think that Infested had some elements of that. Like if you think about like the wide open areas of Freehold and Kragmaw's room in the Underrot, I think those were good examples of places where Infested actually did a pretty good job of like letting a tank and a group with coordinated CCs like do something really cool where they're like, okay, CC these 3 mobs and like we'll pull all the Infested at once and then we'll pull the rest of the stuff and that'll be really cool and we'll save a lot of time this way. And like you kind of felt like you were pulling this canvas of like mobs and doing a cool set of Infested pulls. Now in most places Infested didn't really work out to be all that fun, but I could see where the idea was there, and I think they've actually accomplished that kind of creativity with Reaping. Like with Reaping, it's like, okay, what am I going to reap onto this time? Like you're looking at your MDT and you're like, okay, how do I make this Reaping work out? Like what am I going to pull so that I can get a 60% wave here so that I can do this thing that I want to do with Reaping?
Yeah, it really makes the key feel alive, and everyone has to be on board. Like, okay, we're at 38%. This can be 39%. This mob gets 4 count. That'll be 40%. All right, this is gonna be Reaping. What do we do it with? Those kind of situations are fun. Learning the keys with each other and planning that out.
And I think that easy affixes are just good. Like the easier the affixes are, the better. I like hard content, and I think the affixes being easy makes the hard content like you're gonna do harder keys and you're gonna do harder stuff more of the time. Instead of like when the affixes are hard, you just do easy pulls most of the time because you can't do any hard and interesting pulls, and you're just there just like suffering through 5 mobs at once because you can't pull any more because of explosive. And that's
so originally at the very beginning of the expansion I was not like into Mythic Plus anymore just because of Infested. It felt like it would just like lug you down and slow you down just so much, and it was like even though balance was like decent in season 1 for BFA, it just felt horrible to play just because of like the coordination required for infested, and then like if you accidentally messed up one infested pull, it would end up like ruining your run sometimes. It just felt like a lot. I hope whenever they said that reaping was too easy, they're talking about shadow melding off reaping, because that's a bad interaction.
That is, yeah,
I would
that is
agree with
stupid.
that, yeah.
I hope that that's what they mean, and not in terms of like relative difficulty to like compared to like the rest of the dungeon.
I think one other nitpick with reaping is the 100% reaping wave being skippable is also, instead of opening up choices, it kind of decreases choices, because anytime you can do that, you just should.
Okay, sure. I don't disagree with that, but like even still, like the 100% reaping wave is fine. I think like the relative power of like the reaping mobs themselves is fine. I think personally.
Yeah. Okay.
And
it could
I hope
maybe
that
be 20%
moving forward
harder.
with the next seasonal. Yeah, I hope with the next seasonal fix, it's not like terrible.
Yeah, I think basically when you read that, like, okay, when the one piece of news you hear about the affixes is they think that reaping is too easy, that's a worrying thing to read for sure. And you're just like, that there's like 10 problem affixes that I have over reaping that are too hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, another like major point was the level 7 row. So I thought overall the level 4 row I thought it was like kind of balanced. So it's bolstering, bursting, raging, sanguine, and teaming. I think teaming and raging are like fine-ish most of the time. Like raging obviously on mini bosses is like not okay, and the fact that it's able to like enrage mini bosses seems a bit much sometimes. But overall, I think raging and teaming are fine. Bolstering, bursting, and sanguine can get fixed if they do end up fixing some of those other mobs that do drop on death fixes. So my level 4 row analysis ended up being that it's normally like decent. It can swing pretty big, like on a dungeon by dungeon basis, like Troll was saying in Motherload, with some of those on death affixes. But I think that it can be fixed a little bit better if they do hammer through just like how the on death affixes interact with the dungeons. What do you guys actually think about that?
Yeah,
I think a lot of these affixes are good, and they're in a good spot by themselves on paper, and that's what Blizzard looks at when they develop them. The problem is when you throw in the other elements of a dungeon, Siege of Borealis, almost every single pack has like a small tier mob where it dies very quickly in the pull, a medium tier mob where it dies halfway through the pull, and then one big mob. And sometimes those big mobs aren't even CCable, and when you throw in stuff like on death affixes like bursting and sanguine and
bolstering is the big one there. Yeah.
Bolstering, yeah, that's not what I'm thinking. Bolstering and Siege is a huge pain because of that tier system of mob health. Whereas a dungeon like Underrot makes those affixes pretty balanced. Almost every mob has the same amount of health. You can control it very easily. If the players play well, they can do the affix correctly, and it doesn't kill the group.
Yeah.
Do you think that on death affixes have any place in the game then, by that degree? Because it's challenging to make the dungeons themselves interesting while making them balance with these on death affixes being in the game, of course, right? By that logic.
Yeah, it's hard to say how you make a dungeon unique without making it swing in the wrong direction with certain affix combos. I mean, obviously they're trying to take into account every affix when they're trying to make these dungeons for Mythic Plus, but I'm sure they do have trouble deciding like, hey, how do I combine class fantasy while also or game fantasy with this dungeon, and how it's supposed to go with every affix combination we currently have in the game, and that won't drive players completely insane. I mean, they probably don't consider some affix combos when they do that, but I think they should if they don't already.
Yeah, I think there are solutions like, okay, if they want to keep this small, medium, large mob paradigm in some dungeons but not others, I think one solution they could have is they could, instead of having every mob proc one copy of each on death affix, you could have it be based on how much health the mob had. So like if a mob has half as much health as all the other ones around it, it does half as much bolstering or bursting or sanguine.
I think that would be a good fix too, yeah. That would be something they could fix after the fact that they made the dungeons for sure.
Yeah, you just, and then big mobs could do bigger versions of those affixes as well, mini bosses could do.
Do you think that bolstering should add damage? So I've gone back and forth on this in my head a little bit. Do you think bolstering should add damage, like the mobs do more damage, or do you think it should just be health? Because I personally think it should just be health, but like I do understand why they want to make it just like horribly, horribly bad for you to bolster them.
I think that would be a good way to make bolstering a little more balanced with the other affixes. Like Sanguine, for example, only heals the mob. It doesn't make them suddenly buff and kill the tank, but bolstering sure does. It gives them more health and more melee damage and everything. So yeah, I think you're right. If they did that, that would be a good bandit fix.
Yeah, my solution for bolstering was just to have it not be like to have it have a duration, so the bolstering stacks fall off if you don't bolster stuff for a little while.
That's also a good one.
I think that bolstering definitely would benefit from a little bit of a nerf. Yeah, it would be nice to have the ability to pull dungeons a little more quickly. I think that's one of the problems you'll see with both bolstering and then many of the level 7 affixes is that they really limit how quickly you can pull the dungeon, and pulling the dungeon quickly is what we want. Like, that's what we want to try and do. And so when it's an affix that just kind of is a full-on red light at that, that's a problem.
Yeah, and when I was going through and I hit the point where I had the level 7 affixes, I just like looked at them and I was like, this is actually just ridiculous. So it's Skittish, Quaking, Necrotic, Grievous, Explosive, Volcanic. And it's like, all right, well, you got Skittish and Volcanic, which are like by far the easiest affixes out of any affix set. Quaking can like gimmickly kill you on some keys, like King's Rest and Toldagor came to mind. Like Golden Serpent, you can just like instantly die to Quaking. Overseer Korgus and Toldagor, you can just instantly die to Quaking. Necrotic makes your tank want to just commit suicide. Grievous makes your healer want to commit suicide. Explosive makes your whole entire group want to commit suicide. And then it's like, well, wait, you have it on the exact same row as Skittish and Volcanic, which are tank threats like a non-affix, and Volcanic is dodge. Like, what?
Definitely the difference between those two and the rest of the row is stark. It's a stark contrast. Yeah, I think that there's definitely a balance. Okay, I think both Quaking and Explosive suffer from the fact that even like no matter how hard you try to play around them, you still get punished by them. So like Quaking just does so much damage to your group every time it procs that no matter like even if you all spread perfectly and nobody's casting at the time, it can still just wipe you on a hard pull. And Explosive, like no matter how on it people are, if you pull more than like 9 mobs, you don't have enough explosive killing potential. So my solution to both of those affixes would be to make it so that if you played around them well, you would not die to them. So the way I would do that is I would make Quaking only do 10% of your health if you were by yourself, and then do 30% per person in your circle. That way, at 2 people, It would do the same damage, and at more than 2 people, it would actually hurt more. But if you were by yourself, if you spread perfectly, you take half as much damage across the group.
Yeah, I like that too.
And my solution,
that's actually a good change.
My solution to Explosive would be, I think Explosive could spawn more often on single target and would be fine. I think that would be okay. And I think Explosive should spawn a lot less often on like 5 or more targets. So it should be a flatter line of like rates of explosive per second to number of mobs you've pulled.
I agree with that.
Dude, I love that the biggest issue with Explosive a lot of the time is nameplate clutter. And you want to know why they actually go to the top of your nameplate frames? Is because they're coded as like non-elite mobs.
Yeah, they're minions.
And so elite mobs have priority. So the explosives instantly go to the top of your nameplate frames and are awful and impossible to target. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think for one, even if you play a meta comp, explosive is still hard. Like Outlaw Rogues destroy explosives in one hit. Prot Warrior's pretty good. Windwalker's not the best, but they can still kill an orb or two. But the real problem is the amount of health that they have. Even after the nerf, explosive is still inaccessible to most classes in the game. Like some classes can't just spend a global at any given second to kill an orb. They'll lose all of their damage. Whereas Outlaw and Prot Warrior don't lose any of their damage.
Yeah, I'm just playing my Elemental Shaman on. I was playing my Elemental Shaman on Explosive Week, and I was like, okay, I could cast a spell into this thing with 2 of my seconds. Like that's what I could do with my life. And then if somebody else kills it while I'm casting my spell, I've done nothing with my seconds here. I could spend all my resource and dump an Earth Shock into it instead of doing an Earthquake, which is my big source of AoE. Or I could like Frost Shock it, and my Frost Shock either crits or I have to do it 3 times to kill it. So that's the life decisions that I have to make when I'm on my my Elemental Shaman against that affix. And I'm just there like, okay, I hope we have somebody in the group who doesn't have to make these decisions and they can do the whole thing for me. Like that's what I do when I'm on my rogue,
Druid
right?
Makes me want to scream. Either I Moonfire the explosive 4 times, or I Star Surge it. Let that sink in. I hit it with my 80k spender or I dot it 4 times with my instant cast, and there really is like almost like sure I'm gonna cast a full channeled Solar Wrath and let the travel time in on that one. That's a real good one.
I've
I
heard,
don't know.
I've heard
it
the
can
solution
You know,
there
better
is
luck meleeing the mob than firing it.
yeah, no, it's feral affinity, right? You go feral affinity
right.
and you go cat form, right? That's
I see.
the answer for balanced druids against
Do I get
explosive.
Predator Swiftness procs from that? Because that might be a.
These are the things that we need you to find out to be a good member of this podcast, Tettles. So that's your homework for next week.
But yeah, no, I think explosive should only like require like 2 hits from individual damage sources, and I think that would almost balance it out in some degree.
Oh yeah, you could make it like totems in PvP, right? Where
2 HP totem, maybe even 1 HP totems, where any global from a DPS or any player in general will hurt the totem a significant amount or kill it. Like that's the way to balance it, in my opinion, or make them spawn a little less, but that still caters to some classes. I think having 1 HP or 2 HP from any given source of damage should do it.
Yeah, the necrotic is its own can of worms that I don't know. I don't know what you feel about necrotic trell. Obviously, it's been changed to be a physical dot recently instead of a magic dot, which was a nerf to Blood Death Knight.
That kind of screwed Death Knights.
Yeah, and that I don't know. Yeah, as a tank, what are your thoughts on necrotic and the state of it in the game right now? Because obviously we're in a necrotic week today.
I think bosses should not apply necrotic. Period. I think it makes some bosses unreasonably difficult because of how they work. Like the pig boss in Waycrest, it's rooted. If you move out of melee range, which you probably should for necrotic, that's how the affix works. You kill the group because he slams everyone. The boss in Temple Galvazed, you can't really move because everyone needs to soak the beams, and if they ever miss a tick, you wipe. So those 2 bosses are the most prime examples. I think if you were able to kite them, it'd be okay. But if they continue designing bosses like that, they need to make them not apply necrotic, because otherwise you have to have someone in your group taunt and then pray they live for a second while you drop your stacks.
Do you think that's reasonable to expect people to taunt, like to have somebody else in the group taunt a boss off you? Because that to me just seems like just like a wild balancing thing to even sit there and say, all right, well, we're expecting them to have a secondary class that has a taunt ability and will have the forethought to taunt the boss whenever the tank is high on necrotic stacks in order to be able to get them a reset.
It's a very unique skill set to ask of someone to do that. Not only do they need to taunt the boss, they also need to live, so they need to pop a defensive. They also need to taunt right after the tank parries a melee or dodges, so that they have 2 or 3 seconds left on their necrotic debuff. And if they don't do that, then they have to tank for the entire 9-second duration, which is kind of insane for a DPS player in a high key. So they have to be pretty skilled at it. They have to be watching necrotic stacks as well as the other mechanics. And then in some cases, they also have to take the boss somewhere else so they don't get meleeed to death while they do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's reasonable to ask DPS players to do that. There's a few out there that are really good at it, but I don't think the general public should have to know how to do that one.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a question of like, does the general public actually have to know how to do this? Like, do you need to do this to do your weekly 10? Our bosses
on Galvest, like I think you actually do on Galv,
I
because
know,
you'll actually end up getting after 2 minutes, like a 1.5 or 2 minutes on Galv, you're at like 30 stacks.
I mean, I probably have to reset stacks twice on a fortified 24 temple on that boss, and that's probably like a 3-minute fight. So on a 10, I mean, you maybe have to reset stacks once, and you could probably get away with killing it without ever having to reset stacks. But if the healer's under-geared, I mean, it becomes a problem.
Yeah,
it's all a matter of who's in the group and what level of play and gear they're at. But yeah, still, I wouldn't expect any player to just randomly know how to do that. You have to teach that one for sure.
Yeah, so like I did 2 temples earlier today, 18 and 19, and I was on a Demon Hunter and I spec'd Netherwalk and I was ready to taunt Nether on Galvazit, and neither time did the tank actually need it. Now, both times we were doing maybe more damage across the group than an average 19 or 18 would require. Like we would have completed both those keys with 5 to 10 minutes to spare. So like maybe we're a little bit over geared for that content, but still like it didn't seem that necessary for like, because most groups are doing keys like a lower than the level of like, okay, we need to do everything perfectly to beat this key by 30 seconds, right? Which is the kind of, I think that's the range where you're really starting to also need the taunts from DPS or healers on necrotic bosses. I don't know. I think you're right though. Like there are some bosses where it's necessary for like some pug keys, and that skill set is not out there for many people. I think that it's reasonable to have that be part of the game. I don't know.
I think it's reasonable to an extent. I just maybe not some bosses. And it's another problem of how they design the bosses, where you can't kite them, you cannot leap away, you do anything as a tank except just sit there and have some kind of gimmicky strategy to deal with it. However, I do think the change they did to Necrotic, where they made it physical, was good. It kind of makes every tank struggle at the same rate, except maybe Brewmaster, who dodges more melees than others on single target.
Yeah, Brewmaster can drop stacks on single target against anybody, which is really a strength of that class on this week.
And even AoE, you kind of gain stacks at about half the rate of most tanks, and so you can wait a lot longer to kite. I mean, right now they're balanced a little less so with threat, so you do have to be in there longer anyway because you're a Brewmaster instead of a Prot Warrior. That's another story.
yeah. That's the problem with Brewmaster, right? Is it's skittish every week. Yeah. I don't know. This week though does feel like a good Brewmaster week. You've got Ring of Peace and you're good against Necrotic. Like it's kind of the best possible set of level 4 and 7 affixes for you, probably.
Yeah, it sure is. I played a couple keys the other day on my monk for the first time in a while. High keys like 19s, I think, and it was actually a blast. I really miss playing it. If only I wasn't forced by law to play Prot.
Yeah, if only if only the police wouldn't come get you if you put on your Brewmaster for real keys. That would be a nice world to live in. Okay, so that's our discussion of Tettles' article here on Affix balance. I guess one kind of final question that that this article leads to is, should affixes exist? Which is an interesting question to ask. It's definitely kind of out of left field, but it does. I mean, it's kind of the logical conclusion when we're talking about like how many of these affixes need to be nerfed and the impact of them on the dungeon needs to be reduced. Tettles, what do you think about affixes? Just should they exist?
So I don't personally subscribe to the Sistar ideology of no affixes. I actually do enjoy how affixes end up changing the dungeons in some degree, and it does make it refreshing a lot of times. So I knew I had a different article, and I initially talked about how maybe removing affixes would make the dungeon experience a little bit better. And I think actually the casual player base gets a lot of value out of affixes and how they make the dungeons refreshing to them. I know like we as a group end up enjoying the challenge of the dungeons and would prefer to see the dungeon mechanics be more in the forefront. But for a lot of casual players who do lower level keys, they don't actually get challenged by the dungeons themselves. They just kind of run through the dungeons. So they get a lot of enjoyment out of the affixes. So I think affixes should stay. And I actually personally enjoy affixes sometimes, but I think their agency over the course of the whole entire dungeon is just a little bit much for me. If they affect the dungeon anywhere from like 20 to 40%, I would prefer it to be like 10 to 15% in terms of like completability and how challenging it will end up making in an instance.
Trell, how about you?
I enjoy affixes for sure. I think it brings the variability dungeons need and unique experience week by week. I don't like the specific weeks where it makes some dungeons unplayable or extremely difficult, but affixes in general I do like. I just think they should balance them a little better and maybe tone it down a bit when it comes to certain combinations, certain mobs applying certain affixes, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I just want to jump back in on that as well. They have done a better job this expansion compared to Legion. I know Legion had very blatant issues with push weeks versus like not being able to even do keys on some weeks. Like basically any tyrannical week was automatically a no. Any week that wasn't like Sanguine Volcanic was also like automatically a no to some degree as well. So Legion had even bigger issues in Battle for Azeroth, but the system is still broken, and I don't know if it's actually in a state that can be balanced to some degree.
Yeah, I think that Reaping is a great example of them coming out with an affix that is perfect, and I think that if they move all the affixes impact on the dungeon in that direction, it'd be really exciting. I for one, I think that we would be a lot, like Mythic Plus would be a lot worse without affixes. I think even for us, like even though we, as you were saying, our players that are looking for challenges, we're looking to do hard content. I think that the fact that Mythic Plus is different from week to week is something that makes us play the game more and makes it more exciting. So I think that it is a good thing. And I even with the affixes in the state they are in now, I would rather have them than nothing. But I do have some. I think that if each affix were maybe about half as impactful, or if all the hard affixes were about half as impactful as they were right now, that would be the world I want to live in most. Okay.
I like that, yeah.
Let's move on to the raid portion of our show here today, which looks, we talked a lot about Mythic Plus. We might not talk quite as long about raid, but we are going to spend a little bit of time discussing the raid. And of course, the new raid is Crucible of Storms, and the kind of the newish news. It's not that new anymore, but it's still the newest thing to happen. Has been a set of balance changes to both Crucible of Storms, both bosses, and Lady Jaina Proudmoore back in Battle of Dazar'alor. So this is a series of nerfs that have occurred to Jaina, the Restless Cabal, and Uu'nat. All the bosses have been hit by 5% health, and then each of them have also received significant nerfs to mechanics in the fight. Uu'nat in particular has received... Uu'nat and Jaina both got huge nerfs between the two of them. And yeah, I guess, do you guys think that Uu'nat got nerfed too early? This is 3 weeks after it was released on Mythic, that it's been hit with this set of nerfs. Tettles, what do you think about the timing of these nerfs to Uu'nat?
So it actually got nerfed like in a similar time frame to Helya, from Trial of Valor from Legion. So that's something to be taking into account. Helya was in a 3-boss instance, so it was a similar mini raid, and it got nerfed in a similar time frame. I think the reason that a lot of the higher end players are still upset about Uu'nat getting nerfed is that so few guilds ended up killing that boss pre-nerf. I think it was something like it had to be like almost sub 20 guilds in the world kill that boss pre-nerf. Personally, I don't know if that boss should have gone live at that state where it was a 750 pull boss, but on some degree as well, I think it's also fine that it's a 2-boss raid that you're supposed to be doing after Lady Jaina Proudmoore, that it's like kind of okay, but that was definitely a rough one to be 750 pulls for pieces. So I don't know. Personally, I didn't want it nerfed yet because I was still progressing on it, but at the same time, I don't want it to be in that state for like the 6 weeks or the 5 or 6 weeks required for me to progress on it at that level, right?
I was glad they nerfed it. I was just looking forward to it. I was like, oh, Tuesday can't come soon enough. I mean, I was getting kind of burnt out on the boss anyway. I don't know. From my raider perspective and tanking the boss, I was very enjoying the nerfs coming up as when they did. I think a 2-week period where it gave a chance to all the guilds going as hard as they possibly could to kill the boss was good. I think 10 to 11 guilds killed it before the nerfs. Is that right?
What was honestly one of...
I don't know. I don't have that number in front of me. I guess...
Okay, so 15 guilds killed it pre-nerf. Honestly, literally killed it 3 minutes before server reset. Before the nerfs came through.
Oh, wow.
So
that's
so there were 15. Whereas for Helya, there were something in the 45-ish range.
Yeah, now Helya...
So I think the timing was fine. I think the boss was just a lot, especially right now. I personally prefer challenges with raid bosses in general, but I do actually think that Mythic raid difficulty as a whole is a bit much for the whole player base, as weird as that sounds.
Okay, so first off, I guess let's just kind of give a little bit of context here with like how we are each of the context that each of the three of us have, like how we're each doing on Uu'nat, because I think that's relevant to this discussion. So all three of us are progressing on Uu'nat right now. Tettles, what percent of you guys got Uu'nat down to?
18.
18. All right. Trell, how about you?
We had a 1% wipe, and then a 2% wipe, and a 3% wipe in 2 days. We had a 1% wipe on Wednesday, and then raided 4 more hours on Thursday and didn't kill it. And that was a disappointment.
Are you guys overtiming?
No, not technically overtime.
Wait a second, hold on.
Not technically overtime. Hang on, I'm hearing some sirens in the background.
Oh yeah, here comes the people police. They're coming.
Okay, yeah, and then I have Uu'nat down to 8%. So splitting the difference between the two of you. So yeah, all three of us have. I guess we all progressed on this boss pre-nerf. We progressed on it before these nerfs were put in. Before the nerfs, I had it down at 36% or something. I don't know where you guys were on.
I think we got it to 28% ish before the. And for me, the nerf was great. Like, instantly, we got more P3 pulls because less players had the resonance, which meant less P1 and P2 wipes instantly. I mean, having 12 resonance instead of 18 is a huge thing.
Yeah,
more space to work with and all that.
It's interesting because, like, okay, like for me personally, I didn't find the resonance to be a particularly tough mechanic to execute. But even with mechanics like that, like even if you screw it up once per night, that's going to cost a wipe. So if you screw it up like once every 2 nights, and that goes down to once every 4 nights with this kind of nerf, that's a lot of extra pulls that become progression pulls.
It just makes phase 2 with the relics on the ground so much easier, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you actually, I mean, one kind of extra effect of this is that it pushes phases faster too. Like you don't have to be standing there, or you don't have to. You have 6 extra people who are just doing boss damage instead of running to their marks. So that speeds up the transitions on these,
as well as the 5% health.
Yeah, and then the 5% health nerf on top of this is massive too. Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the interesting things, like the change to 12 from 18, was not designed to like nerf the difficulty of the fight so much as make melee less toxic on that fight, right? Like one of the problems with the fight before was that if you brought more than a couple melee, it really got crowded up there in melee, and you'd get this problem where like, okay, resonance is coming out, melee are gonna have to like spread back out of melee range in order to not be right on top of each other when the marks come out. So that's.
I mean, it's not like a. That's not like a fix to melee being bad on that fight, though. It just makes you be able to actually bring them. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's not like a fix. It's not like a fix to the problem. It's just like a band-aid.
It really is. Yeah.
And then if you end up having people die, and then it's like, all right, well now I have resonance back in melee, so I don't really know.
It really just means that you're like safe to bring a couple extra melee. Like you can bring 4 instead of 2, maybe.
They've done a really bad job this expansion of balancing fights around having melee in general. Like the fights are either melee just end up AFK tunneling the boss, or melee end up being. I don't know why like melee space is a mechanic on a boss fight, like, but I guess it is from a design principle for them. It's weird to me.
It's tough, right? Because it's tough to like you want to design this mechanic like unstable resonance, and it's like, okay, if this doesn't affect melee, then like melee are just going to target dummy the boss. But if this does affect melee, then you can't bring too many of them. We had a similar problem on Mithrax, right? With Mithrax spawning the mind control orbs, and they kind of ended up doing a similar reversal on that fight where instead of it being like melee or bad, it was instead, okay, melee don't have to do anything. It's kind of a problem.
That's not better. Like
no, it's not necessarily better. No, it's better in that like guilds can actually kill the boss that have a lot of melee on their roster, but it's worse in that like you're still not creating these boss fights where melee have interesting mechanics that they have to do. You're instead just saying like, okay, this mechanic is lethal to melee, so we're just not going to make it target melee. And that's I agree. It's a problem. It's a really hard problem to solve though. Like I don't know how. There's a very limited set of space for designing mechanics that are hard and also doable for melee.
I don't even know the solution to that one either. It's either you make it incredibly difficult to play for melee, or you make it way too easy. So somewhere in between would be ideal, but I actually don't know the fix for that one. Unlike some Mythic Plus.
Yeah, it's
maybe reduce the size of the orbs on Mithrax, or just make a much smaller amount of resonances and then give them back to melee as well. But I don't know, something like that maybe.
Yeah, or I don't know, like. There has to be a creative solution to this kind of problem, right? Like it's not as I don't know, maybe it's just there are different mechanics for melee than there are for ranged, but they're hard in their own right, and they're the kind of things that would be impossible for ranged to do. They've done good melee mechanics in the past, right? Like there was the melee dance in Mist of Pandaria, right, on that one boss that like everybody in melee range of the boss had to dodge the different attacks in the different ways. Like there was the one where you went to the left of it, the one where you went to the right of it, the one where you went out of range of it, and the one where you went like behind it. It's like those sorts of things. There are creative ways to have.
Those are just good mechanics. I like that, and the most recent example on Jadefire, that boss has a mechanic where it gives the same kind of face your camera toward the thing hitting you to every member in the raid, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And everyone has kind of an equal shot at the mechanic because it's isolated and doesn't have to do with melee or range being near the boss or being spread and all that.
Yeah, I think one example of a recent raid where melee mechanics were pretty well balanced, maybe a little bit on the side of like being too easy for melee, but definitely not like you were AFK. It was like Nighthold. I think Nighthold had a pretty good balance of melee had to do some stuff, but you could bring quite a few of them and be okay as a raid leader.
I mean, melee on Augur was like pretty bad, but then Alice on the Gul'dan, it was good. So there was some there was some balance to it, for sure. I would say melee on Croesus was okay as well. And then I don't know. So through that instance, yeah, I think melee was like fine. But after Nighthold, melee has just been in like a either they have to do too many mechanics that are like almost unfair to be able to ask them to do, in some degrees, or it's like entirely too easy where they're just like patchworking the boss and just like ooking out the whole entire time, breathing through their mouths and
Ooking out,
screaming at their monitor or something.
Yeah, the melee class fantasy, of course.
Ooking.
So yeah, that's I don't know. Yeah, it's unclear what the solution is, but it's definitely a tough problem for them to solve.
Definitely not to class stack only ranged though. Like sure, Uu'nat did not require like actual class stacking like we initially thought with some of the comps that we were selling with like a full Warlock roster from Method and stuff like that. We obviously saw Club Camel running like a pretty diverse composition. They also had like a Feral Druid.
They had a Feral Druid, yeah.
Yeah, they were really bringing the budget classes. I think they might have been struggling with their roster or something. I'm kidding, but like, I mean, the boss very clearly could have been killed with like almost any composition. But like, man, melee sucked so much ass on that fight. I don't know. They're still pretty bad on that fight, I think, too.
Yeah, it's the problem. That's the problem of balancing of melee and ranged. But I guess kind of back to the specific Uu'nat and Jaina and Cabal nerfs. I think that one other problem that we see with this is that we see this like set of nerfs to a 2-boss raid, and I think that like, okay, here's my perspective on this. Like, you have these 2 bosses come out that are like really hard and difficult. I guess that's the same word, but really 2 really hard bosses come out, and they're really fun for a lot of like high-end guilds. But there are a lot of like medium-end guilds that like were maybe working on Jaina, maybe decided they weren't going to do Jaina, or maybe just killed Jaina like recently, and look at Restless Cabal that like, you know, very good guilds are taking a while to kill and are struggling with, and just kind of decide we can't do this, or you know, we'll start progressing on this and we're not going to make much progress on it, or like we don't have the roster for this. So I think that it like when you like okay, they've designed these 2 great bosses that are hard and interesting, and I think that these are 2 great bosses that should come after 7 easy bosses, and that way there's 7 easy bosses for for everybody else to work on, while the methods and limits of the world work on these like 2 last bosses of a raid tier. And then by contrast, like I think if you're going to release a smaller raid, it would maybe make sense to have them be a little bit less hard than this one. Like at least maybe something like Trial of Valor, at least, where there was an Odin and a Guarm before the Helia. I think works more nicely for players in that way. I don't know though.
Sure.
What do you think?
I could agree with that. Yeah. I think there should be a buffer of bosses, like Dryno said, where the medium level to lower end guilds can all participate and do something until they nerf the 2 last bosses, where it's more accessible for the public. Like Limit and Method and the other high end guilds pieces, they have the access to 8 warlocks or 5 shaman, or the combination of both, where almost every other guild there's no way. Like they'd probably have a wide range of players that only play 1 or 2 classes, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's also like really bad though. Like, okay, so to some degree, I don't want to discredit like lower end guilds, because like I guess we would all be mythic guilds by classification, right? People who have killed Grong Mythic are in a mythic guild and are by and large even like top end players.
They're probably top 1%, if not higher than that.
Yeah,
for sure. All people that have stepped into raids. Yeah,
and they are a mythic guild, but at the same time, it's like it's so hard. I don't know. I think like mythic raiding without like a good group of people is actually so challenging. Like, when was the last time you guys have actually progressed on heroic, like beyond like the first week?
It's it's been a few tiers.
I was gearing an ult and I found a normal progression guild, and I did a normal progression pulls of Rosticon, and it was something. It was
that could be fun. like
it was fun. I mean, I was pumping. It was awesome. I was looking at the damage meters. I was like, this is great. I should do this more often.
Everyone's at a different level of play, and I think as long as there's some kind of content for all those levels of play, it's good. The problem with this raid is, like we've been saying, is there's only 2 bosses, and on the mythic level, they're tuned so high that it's just only accessible to like 0.5% instead of maybe the majority of the mythic raiding population to at least have a hope of killing the boss, you know?
Yeah, and it's like somebody just said in your chat, Ratnos, the whole game is too casual, but then they made mythic raids too difficult by comparison. It's just like the scale of both of those is just like so wildly different. And I think us three, like we're very good at like rating by like scale of relative to the population of people who play WoW. But even then, it's still very challenging for a ton of people. Like I think less than 300 guilds in the world have killed, like literally like less than 200 guilds in the world have killed Jaina, even like post nerf, right?
I feel like the Jaina number is in the higher 3 digits, but
I think it might be like 300. But like even then, it's like even after the nerfs and everything, that boss was released in like early February, right? Yeah. I don't know, man. That's still like really rough.
Yeah, I think that the Jaina nerfs. Okay, this was a good time to hit Jaina with this set of nerfs.
Sorry, my power almost just went out.
None of that. Don't have that happen.
Stay with us, Trell. Yeah, if your power goes out, the whole stream is going to be in trouble as well, because my the picture of me and the picture of Tettles are also just going to be completely messed up. So we need you. We need you badly. Yeah, I think this is a good time to hit Jaina with this size nerfs. Like these are some very serious nerfs to Jaina. Some of them, so that one of the nerfs, the one about the random bombard locations in stage 1 being less likely to light a Zandalari ballista on fire, that nerf in particular I think should have come when the fight was released, because that was really stupid.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah. The others, I think that this is a good time in the life cycle of Lady Jaina Proudmoore to hit her with this set of nerfs. I think that there are a lot of guilds that this is going to really help them kill it, and I don't think it was, I don't think it needed to continue to exist in such a hard state, particularly given how easy the 8 bosses before it were. I think there were a lot of guilds that really ran into a wall on Jaina in multiple different ways and couldn't kill it. And so this is nice to...
The actual wall, too. Yeah, you're right.
You see what I've done there?
That's a good point. I like
that. Okay. So that's, I guess... Mythic Raid difficulty as a whole. Yeah. Anybody have any thoughts that they didn't quite?
I grabbed a couple from earlier. So in response to whenever we were talking about like pulling power relative to how you ended up doing packs, Jazzo ended up typing in chat, classes were gods in Legion, and that's why it's even possible. So why is not even like really a question? It's still something to expand on. I think like packs of Trash and Mythic Plus end up lasting so long now relative to Legion 2, which is why you actually have a lot of these challenges, especially like the difference between doing a 10 and doing like a 22. The pack will literally last like a minute and a half on a 22 versus 20 seconds on a 10 maybe. Like
yeah, with equal gear maybe 30 seconds or less. It's a pretty big difference. That really messes with CD timings too, like whether you use 1 avatar or 2 avatars per pull.
Yeah, learning like how long stuff lives. I don't know. That's kind of one of the interesting things about doing higher and higher keys is you kind of have to pull bigger as you get to higher numbers of keys, right? Because like, okay, this pack is going to last like you have to do more damage to do the dungeon in time, and the only way to do more damage is to pull more mobs at once and leverage your AOE DPS against a higher number of targets. So you get to these interesting spots where it's like, okay, now in these high keys I have to find a way to pull all 9 of these at once, which is a cool thing about it. But it also means that like you keep adding to these pulls and they keep taking longer and longer, and you end up in these like trash pulls that last a minute and a half or 2 minutes. Yeah.
Do you think that's fun? I personally don't find it fun. I preferred the style of group them up, Gorfine's Grasp, leg sweep, solar beam, blow it up. But that might have just been me. I
think this is better gameplay. I think this is more. It's more difficult. It's more interesting. And I think that those are characteristics that are good about dungeons. I know. What do you think, Trell?
Okay.
I think as a tank, I'd rather not just press mass grip and then run away for the whole dungeon. Personally, I think it's fun for DPS for sure.
Wait, you didn't even mass grip last expansion. Hold on, wait a second.
Yeah, you were keg smashing.
Master. Yeah. But in the end, I think it's a good change where they tried to eliminate the kiting meta for the entire pull. I don't like the way they did it, where they made the melee mechanics hit the nearest target if the tank's out of range. I think that's kind of difficult and unintuitive to play around, especially for new players. That just doesn't make sense if you're the tank. Like, why is he killing my friends when I'm 2 steps away from them? But the fact that they tried to eliminate the big kiting style is good, in my opinion. If they do it in a different way, I think it's good.
Yeah, maybe you give the mobs like an ability that they only cast if the tank is out of melee range, and it's like something different than what they normally do. So like that's what you have to deal with if you kite them, and it's something new that you have to play around.
Yeah, or at least like give those kinds of things like cast time so that you can deal with it in a different manner than just instantly losing a party.
Some visual, at least something like, okay, one experience that's common as a melee DPS when your tank starts to kite is you just fall over and you have no idea why you died, and that's not a fun experience for sure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is interesting to play around, but it's not interesting. It's not like something that you want people to have to deal with in like 14s or whatever, which they do on some weeks. So
yeah, for sure. Another thing that people were talking about in the chat is, do you think that there should be mechanics specifically designed around melee as opposed to having ranged and melee mechanics be the exact same?
We're talking about raids again now, or are we talking about M+?
For raid.
For raids. Okay. Yeah.
Because right now you have like just group-wide mechanics, like the unstable resonance and even like void crash to some degree from both Restless Cabal and Uu'nat. And it's like just group-wide mechanical stuff. Do you think that melee and range should have separating mechanics?
I think that there is a space for melee-specific and range-specific mechanics. Like, okay, like Ballistae on Jaina were kind of a range/healer-specific job. And there are a lot of like ranged-only mechanics, but there aren't a lot of melee-only mechanics, and it's kind of hard to like make a melee-only mechanic. I think like the barrels on Jaina that you throw off the side of the boat were maybe supposed to be that kind of thing, but they ended up just being handled by the fact that the mobs could just be prevented from doing that. But yeah, I think that that's a good way to make interesting stuff for melee that's not like unbalanced for how easy or hard it is for range. Is just make it only target melee, and make it something that you have to do to kill the fight as well. Like make it something where by doing it you do something important for killing the boss. Yeah, I like that idea. What do you think, Trell?
Yeah, I think it's really hard to design those kind of mechanics. A lot of times they'll put in stuff like the barrels you said on Jaina, or the barrels that reminded me of the boss in Toldagor, where you have to move the barrels to the corners so the boss doesn't blow up the whole room. I think that's probably supposed to be a tank melee mechanic, but it just gets thrown to the healer because there's nothing to heal, and the healer can do it without losing damage from the group. So
yeah,
that's kind of hard to design.
One problem with mechanics that anybody can do is that melee will tell somebody else to do it so that they can keep hitting the boss, because that's our class fantasy.
Nope.
Yeah, and so I don't know. You need to design something that like explicitly targeted melee, or like only melee could interact with, that kind of thing, before we would actually stop just making the healers do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to think of like a hard fix for that, but I think you're right on the money there. We're maybe limited to melee specs have to do the mechanics.
Yeah, you got the win.
I don't know how you do that though.
In the Holy Pallies.
Yeah, then you get the healers that are melee. That doesn't work out.
I want to see that one. That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
I want to see those healers struggle. Because right now we have a Mistweaver monk in a raid, and he just stands in melee. Actually, no, he doesn't stand in melee. He stands in between ranged and melee the whole entire time, just doing nothing but casting. And it's like, I'm actually very jealous of you right now as you stand here doing nothing.
Our Holy Paladin was so mad when this change to Uu'nat came out that said the resonance isn't going to target melee, and then it turns out it still targets Holy Paladins.
It still works on Holy Paladin.
Yeah,
I don't understand why. Yeah. It doesn't work on Mistweaver, but it works on Holy Paladin.
I just wake up one day, the day after these nerfs go live, and there's 10 notifications in Discord, and he's just like raging about it. He's made us all submit bug reports. It's great.
Yeah, it is kind of confusing. Holy Pally should be a melee classified healer, especially if Mistweaver is already, and it is most of the time for most mechanics. So
yeah,
sure. Like,
I mean, Holy Avenger is like a melee thing too. I don't know. I think that class should be classified as melee, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and druids when they're in cat form should count too. So
I think that's a bit much, but yeah, sure, I guess.
How's
hop in
how's cat form ranged?
Druids need to be buffed, you know?
Yeah,
Druids
exactly.
need to have more privilege.
I mean,
Exactly.
dude, I'm down to hop in cat form when I need the mechanics to work advantageously to me. I don't know. Not too concerned.
Okay. Yeah. No. I can see how that would be problematic actually. No. All right.
I had a good question from earlier. It was talking about the tank balance at the beginning of the podcast. One of them was, will Prot Warriors be out of the meta spot when the 50% nerf to Thunderclap damage during Avatar goes in? That's the only nerf that I've seen so far that they have planned for Prot Warrior, and that is just not enough. I think Prot Warrior will still be by far the best tank. Not only do they do a lot of damage, but they have a spammable AoE button, Thunderclap, and that's still going to do a roughly large amount of damage, even with a 50% nerf.
Definitely more than unbuffed everybody else will do. Yeah.
Yeah, it will still do more threat and damage than, say, Keg Smash on a 7-second cooldown where you can Thunderclap every other. And so that alone still leaves Prot Warriors the best defensive tank and the best offensive tank, probably. So they need to put in some more nerfs, basically, to make Prot Warriors out of the meta.
There's a similar question that I get a lot, you know, as I play Rogue, and there's an outlaw nerf on the PTR, but it's not very big. It's like a nerf to the Keep Your Wits About You trait, which is one of the most powerful parts of the Outlaw toolkit right now. But the nerf is nowhere near substantial enough to make me think that Outlaw won't be the best spec still, or at least competitive, like in the top tier.
Oh yeah, tragic that you have assassination still.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that like one of the problems with Rogue is that we have two absurd specs that like.
Oh yeah, you have the second or third best spec as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have Outlaw, which is the best, and you got Assassination, which seems reasonable. I don't know.
And if you talk to Flawless, Assassination's better to him. Like that's I don't know. This Assassination is very, very good. It suffers from like being a little bit more finicky than Outlaw. You need to save your vanishes for damage. You don't have access to gouge. You don't have a stun on your like damage rotation in the same way. But other than those things, like the spec is absurd. It can do huge numbers. It can specialize into priority damage or AoE or single target with Azurite traits in a way that Outlaw can't. So yeah, I mean, the Rogue is a pretty safe place to be right now, given that you have Shroud and two of the most broken DPS specs in the game in your class. Okay. Either you snag any other questions? Yeah. All right, fire one final question.
So we got one more. Do any of you have ideas for Mythic Plus affixes that may be interesting or fun? So, I personally think that level 7 row with Skittish, Quaking, Necrotic, Grievous, Explosive, Volcanic, I personally would remove it and then add Kiss Curse affixes in its place. And like an example of that would be if you actually kill the Explosive Orb, instead of either not dying, you actually kill it and you get like a damage buff. Or the alternative is you just don't get the damage buff. The Volcanic is like if you end up standing in the Volcanic, you end up getting like haste or something like that, but you do take damage. It's just like some trade-off with that as well. And then just overall, that would be my change in terms of like what I would change about affixes. As for like a neat designed affix, I think I would like to see the affix. I think I would like to see the affix system get a little bit more tuned in line as opposed to like adding more affixes personally. I want positive affixes though.
Yeah, so when you say Kiss Curse, that's like, okay, it does something good if you do it well, and it curses you if you do it badly.
Yes. So or you could, somebody was memeing about the Uu'nats, the Star Augur / Uu'nat marks, the resonance marks. That's another example of like you like on a timer you could have marks come out and you end up like linking up, and if you link up with your correct color, then you get like a damage buff or whatever. It doesn't have to be a damage buff, it could be like something else. But as opposed to right now where fixes are only negative things, I don't think they have to be that way though.
I agree, yeah.
I agree.
And I think that you could design affixes that are even purely positive, and just have them bring a health and damage increase as well to the dungeon, yeah. You
could bring back Safuza's Secret as an affix, like...
Yeah, that sounds fun. That sounds awesome.
I would like that personally, but
yeah, I mean, obviously you need the row to be somewhat balanced, and that's a problem that we've had with the level 7 row, is that it's not balanced. But if some of the affixes, if there was some affixes that gave your group a really big buff, but also increased the difficulty of the dungeon by a flat % that was really high, I think that would be an interesting direction they could take it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone likes feeling powerful, so any affixes that you can severely reduce the harmful effects of them or gain a positive effect from them by doing them well, I think is a good addition to the... Like, bolstering is controllable on a good dungeon where every mob has the same amount of health, and if you play it really well, you get a good feeling of killing all the mobs at the exact same time, and then they all barely bolstered at all, and you don't take any extra damage, and you hardly increase the time of the pull. And then in Tettles' case, if he wants he suggests an affix where it gives you a positive benefit. If you sit in Volcanic and you killed the pack faster because you did more damage, but you took just a little bit more damage because of the affix, I think that'd be really good for the game.
I guess like all the items that are from the Crucible of Storms raid kind of have this thing to them, right? Like they all have Kiss Curse like effects on them, right?
Yeah.
Like
what was the mechanic from Mists of Pandaria that whenever you were taking more damage as this tank, you'd end up doing more damage? Vengeance. What if Skittish was Vengeance?
That'd be great. I would love that, but
interesting.
I don't know. I think Vengeance got taken away.
Okay, again, I'm just like projecting out just like random ideas. These are obviously not like very thought out, but that could be something that would be like obviously that would be a bit ridiculous. But again, I think a lot of people want Vengeance back. I think it was a cool mechanic, right?
Yeah, I think every tank probably misses Vengeance that played it in Mob. I only hear good things about it. I didn't play during that time, but something like that would be great. We would all.
All right, how about troll affix? Do you guys have any troll affixes that you've ever thought of that like you've just played with a group and you're like, okay, if they've created this affix, the group would just wipe over and over again? Like here's an example for me. The way this affix works is anytime anybody uses a kick ability on a target that's not currently casting, it just like zaps them for a huge amount of damage. So you just have two people overlap kicks and just kill somebody. Yeah.
Anytime a rogue DFAs a mob inside of Sanguine, they instantly die.
Oh, between the eyes, you mean?
Yeah, between the eyes, not DFA trolling.
Okay, oh, yeah. I think you should definitely kill the rogue. That would be a really good lesson on not to stun mobs.
No, it's a spell reflect. Hold on, wait a second. Whenever mobs are standing in Sanguine, it's a spell reflect, and if you end up CCing them inside the Sanguine, you instantly.
Yeah,
that would be a pretty good troll affix.
We've come out with a buff for Sanguine. Yeah, that's our answer. Okay, I like it. Yeah. Okay.
I think one troll affix they put in they almost put in the game. They were developing an affix. I can't remember the name of it, but it was mobs will randomly lose. The mobs will randomly gain a buff, or they're immune to any loss of control effects.
That was so ridiculous. I'm glad that they did not come through with
that. So you just couldn't stun them?
You couldn't CC them at all, like periodically.
Patch notes.
Interesting.
They didn't put in the game for obvious reasons, but it'd be funny to watch any mob with a high damage cast that just can't be stopped and goes off and wipes the group.
They already have lieutenant mobs in this game. I think they already have that.
Yeah. Okay. I like the troll affix ideas. Awesome. All right. Well, I guess that's going to do it for us on the question and answer front, and that's also going to do it for us on the entire show front. So we've done it. We've made it through episode 1 here, the Titanforge podcast. We hope everybody's enjoyed it. Thanks everybody so much for coming to our pilot episode here. We'll be open for feedback. We've got a Twitter account. Tettles, what's our Twitter handle again?
Titanforge WoW. At Titanforge WoW.
At Titanforge WoW. That's where you're gonna want to go to tweet at us, follow us there, and everything. We're gonna be on iTunes. We're gonna be on all 3 of our YouTube channels. So my YouTube channel is just Dratnos. I know what's your YouTube channel, Tettles?
Tettles. I'm not very creative.
Tettles. Trell, what's your YouTube channel?
My YouTube is Trellski.
Trellski, okay. And that's also, then my Twitch is obviously this one, twitch.tv/Dratnos. Trell is also just /Trellski. And Tettles, yours isn't just Tettles, right? It's, where is it?
It's also Tettles. It's TTV Tettles.
TTV Tettles? Okay.
No, it's not TTV Tettles.
It's just Tettles. All right, so all 3 of us are just our names on both YouTube and Twitch. And I would encourage everybody who's enjoyed this show to make sure you follow my 2 hosts here on their Twitch channels also. Make sure you catch them sometime when they're live. They stream Mythic Plus and Raid to some extent at different times. We will be back next week in this same location. And we'll be back hopefully every week after that is the plan, but we'll see what happens from there. And yeah, we'll be anywhere you can find a podcast is the plan also. So thanks everybody for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching, guys. Good turnout for the first stream. It's fun.